Alright, haves and have not fans. This video is basically my response to a question that I've been asked constantly for years, and since it's almost been a month since the series finale, a lot of other people keep asking me the same question too. Jeremy, so who were your favorite characters on the show? And I want to tell you like I tell them, to be completely honest, it depends on the day. I don't think I have a conclusive top 5 like favorite characters. The way I look at a favorite character is someone who I've enjoyed watching for a majority of the duration of a series or movie. Obviously, there are moments of character development, like sometimes a character I can't stand might grow to become one of my favorite characters in that particular franchise. The haves and the have-nots, I feel, had a problem where, number one, it went on for far too long. The pacing really sucked towards the end of the series, mainly the back half. Some of these characters just did not grow at all. They became one note. And in other cases, the character became completely unrecognizable. Basically, the fact that they were nothing like when they first started, which isn't a bad thing, but it's the fact that a lot of these character shifts came completely out of left field for the sake of the plot for one reason or another. So I do have 10 characters, and they're not listed in any particular order. I just picked 10 characters. I made sure at first I wrote the list from memory. Like, okay, when I think about all 196 episodes, I believe, which characters were my favorite. And then I also picked up Wikipedia, and then a wiki on have and have nots just to make sure I didn't miss any characters at all. And honestly, I could barely pick 7. Some of these characters were kind of just thrown on the list. And I do have reasons why they're on there, because I feel like top 7 really didn't have the same ring as a top 10 list. And trust and believe, I did have a top 10 least favorite characters, so it felt only fair to pick 10 characters to make my favorite list. So what I'll do is I'll name each character, and for each character I'll give a reason why they're on the list. Now, some of these characters might say, hey, they were my favorite during this period of the show, but then they kind of fell off during this period, and go from there. So if there are any characters on this list that didn't make the cut on mine, remember, this is just my personal list. Obviously, you can tell me your top 10 favorite characters in the comment section below, and we'll go from there. So let's jump right into it. I think nobody should be surprised that Amanda Cryer makes the list, because she was the character who, during that first episode, when she came on screen, I'm like, I'm sold. I'm watching the show for her. Adorable, naive. You felt sorry for the character after Professor Cannon raped her, and you knew she was literally in the lion's den, just being in close proximity to Candace. Basically, Amanda was the pawn. She was almost like the Trojan horse that Candace rode into the Cryer estate on in order to raise hell from the beginning of the show. And I feel like overall, it's a shame that her character deteriorated, basically began to rot as the series went on, because I still say that after Amanda died, that craziness and paranoia kind of went, I don't know how, it's almost like a bug or a parasite was latched on to Amanda, and then after she died, that same parasite latched on to Veronica. Because literally, look at season 1 Veronica. She was nothing like she was in, like, let's say season 4 or 5. The more Amanda became less recognizable as a character, the easier it is to recognize Veronica becoming that same character after she was killed off. It's almost as if the craziness of Amanda and the bitch title, the baddest bitch title of Candace, were both handed off to Veronica sometime in like season 2 or season 3. And then that's when Veronica became the fan favorite that she is today. I think for Amanda, it was really important to tell that story of mental health, child neglect and abuse and whatnot. But it's a shame she was killed off the way she was, because her character, in my opinion, had a lot of potential. Like, how did she feel about learning Candace and Jim and their affair? The fact that she was used, and was she pregnant? Those kind of questions never will get answered because she was killed off so early, and we never truly got a conclusive answer to her death. Wyatt admitted to her death, but I just don't accept it because it doesn't make sense in the context of the events that occurred the night of the shooting. So Amanda, definitely on my favorite character list. Melissa. And look, this list isn't just full of women who I was attracted to. Melissa made the list due to the fact that, kind of like Amanda, she was a character who had a lot of potential, but it got to the point where she just became a temptress, kind of. She was literally a female Jeffrey, and well, except for she wasn't gay. She was basically someone who had parents who were opportunists, and they felt more concerned about the family business, the family name, the family legacy than their own children. And you felt bad for Melissa because I think some of her best moments were when she was staying with Hannah and Benny, and then her and Hannah would talk. And I think for me, I was like, I really hope Melissa lives, because to me, Melissa could be the daughter Candace wasn't. You know, Hannah could have this daughter she could love and pretty much take care of in the way that she never could with Candace, because they never really got along. However, Melissa became a different character after that car wreck, basically throwing it to anybody who would walk through Veronica's front door. And I just felt like, even though her fate was definitely tragic, for the first time she took control of her own life, she decided to end it so nobody else could tell her what to do. So Melissa, a tragic character, but definitely one of my favorites. And I do think that it was a shame that her and Jeffrey never really worked together against Veronica, because Jeffrey couldn't stand her. And to be honest, gay or not, I don't think that nobody could disagree with the fact that what Melissa did was wrong. I mean, obviously she did it to save her father, but at the end of the day, you literally took advantage of someone to get pregnant for your own personal vendetta or personal reasons. So it's a shame, but oh well, at least Jeffrey had sex, even though technically he was taken advantage of. But number 3, David. You know, it's a damn shame that Jeremy didn't have me at the top of his list after all the times he's done my voice, and he just couldn't seem to take a moment to say I was number 1. But hey, I'm a good friend, but I'm a better enemy. But anyway, for a major majority of the series, I was rocking with David. But I don't know what happened. I think it was around the time that he literally became David's errand boy, and this somewhat forced romance between him and Hannah. I just couldn't stand the character. I feel like a lot of characters on my least favorite list fell into the same category, where there were characters who I loved for a long stretch of the series, but for whatever reason, maybe they were just on the show too long, or maybe Tyler just didn't give their character enough progression. It got to the point where I just couldn't stand them because of the fact that they were just such a waste. David was calculating, manipulative, a ladies' man, faithful to a fault, or loyal to a fault, as Jennifer Salison said. And of course, the voice. But I think that David is in my top 5, but probably like number 4 or 5, because I think that it got to a point where his character truly got ridiculous for how much that he did for Jim, and basically was, for a lack of a better phrase, a house Negro. He was one of the good ones. I mean, hell, even Jim said it to an extent in one episode. I think it was the episode where Hannah showed him up by, you know, her know-how of what it means to be executor. So he was a great father. We still don't know if he died, but I really did love David in those first several seasons of the series. Number 4, Maggie Day. I think a lot of characters on this list died off sooner than expected, but just enough where it's like, okay, they got knocked off the show before I couldn't stand them. And for me, Maggie, the only real time I couldn't stand her character was after she was written to be a frantic, emotional, lovesick puppy. As soon as David got arrested, she made the bad move of writing that article about Jim and Veronica conspiring together, and that got David out of jail. And after that, that pretty much signed her death warrant, because even though her and David finally had sex, he realized what she had done and didn't want to speak to her. And then all of a sudden she believed Veronica, because if I remember correctly, this was at a point where Veronica and Maggie spoke on the phone, where Veronica was like, okay, you win, just come over to my place, there are some things about David you should know. And then she went into the house. Well, she opened the front door and then got shot to death. But she was a character who I really liked, because I loved the storyline of David and Jim trying to get to the governor's mansion. She was a great campaign manager. Maggie was the closest thing to Charles that we should have gotten. Basically a well-known political figure with great connections who was attracted to one of the main characters. That's as high as we should have went. But no, then we had to introduce Charles and that whole mess. But I think Maggie was the right kind of character to have. Someone who was as formidable as Veronica in her own respect. And this was at a time before Veronica went too crazy. But because in season 1 we saw seeds of her paranoia. But then it got to the point where not even Veronica, who loves control more than anything else, controls the, well, what goes on between a man's legs. So I think that overall, Maggie was definitely a major character who I felt deserved better than what she got. I know that Allison, the actress, did say that she was only supposed to appear in a couple of episodes, but then Tyler brought it back for a longer storyline, and in my opinion, it worked out pretty well. Next up, we got Warlock, Candy Cane. Basically the street version of Benny, Candace's older brother on the street. That's what I thought. And yeah, I know there was a time where Benny was written to be the older sibling, but then that was retcon, yada yada yada. But I remember when they first interacted, and I'm like, it wouldn't surprise me if Warlock and Candace kind of had a thing back in the past, but overall I felt like he was the big brother to watch out for her on the street, in the same way Benny did to watch out for her at home. So I think that overall, Warlock was a great character, because when you think of it this way, Warlock and his crew were the Malones to Warlock and his crew were to Candace what the Malones were to Jim. Basically, a powerful group of enforcers, hired muscle, who have a well-established connection to one of the main characters. And unfortunately, as time went on, it's like they say, I think even Maggie and Veronica and Catherine made this conclusion where Maggie was the one to suggest Veronica get Quincy out of jail to take care of Candace. It's like, what do you do to get rid of a rabid dog? You get an even bigger dog to take care of that one. But the question is, what do you do to put the even bigger dog in their place? So Warlock was utilized in the long run to get rid of Quincy to an extent. I mean, he didn't really do it, but he was on the lookout for Quincy. And when Candace took out Quincy, Warlock became an even bigger threat than Quincy was to Candace in the first place, because not only is he a powerful thug, pimp, drug dealer with reinforcements, but he's also someone who was considered a friend. And once you burned him by lying about how much money you extorted from Jim, no wonder he wanted to kill her ass. So I think that what really was a turn in his character when he became more of a monster, threatening Benny's life, raping Candace, forcing himself on her, and then eventually leading to his downfall. Sure, the dynamic between him and Erica was interesting, going from Candace's bottom bitch to being in a, hey, I do my thing, you do your thing, but we're together relationship between Erica and Warlock. But I think I enjoyed Warlock for a large duration of his time on the show, until it got to the point where he was just written to be a monster. I mean, I did love elements of learning that for for the most part, he was somewhat as a brother to an extent to Candace and Benny when they were younger, because he was pretty much out on the street, but HAHN kind of took him in from time to time to feed him, bathe him, clothe him, kind of like a mother would. But at the end of the day, the streets were calling. And it's an interesting parallel where you have the likes of Warlock and Candace having such an influence like Hannah, but their ties to the street were stronger to their ties to her than their ties to her. And it ended up costing them their lives in a similar fashion. I mean, hell, look at it this way. You had Warlock as an ally against Quincy, and then Warlock became an even bigger threat. Then you had the Malones team up with Candace to take out Warlock, and then they eventually delivered Candace to Jim, leading to her death. So quite the parallels. Next up, Mitch Malone. Loved him for pretty much, I'd say, yeah, I loved his character for quite a while. I mean, I think the fact that Benny having a friend in the tow industry was great. Finding out his connections with the Malones was crazy. He was the kind of guy you want in your corner as a friend, but at the same time, don't want to take advantage of, because he went far and beyond the call of duty, where he was choosing his friend over his family. And I think for me, the only time I really didn't rock with his character was when it got to the point of him wanting Candace too badly, and it really made him seem desperate. Now, of course, the female audience loves Mitch, but at the same time, I feel like they were more fans of the Charles and Candace relationship, that they didn't care for Mitch trying to be the person to swoop in and take Candace, for his own. So I feel like that was really the only time I didn't like his character. But other than that, I have nothing but good things to say about him. Like I said before, great friend. The acting was great from Brett. I love the fact that he had Malone connections, and that's really it. I mean, it seems weird to have. It's like, well, Jeremy, you have a lot more to say about the characters on your list who have flaws and whatnot, but I don't have that much to talk about Mitch because he was a well-rounded character. Great. Next up, we got Landon, who I didn't really like when he became Jeffrey. You remember how Jeffrey was to Wyatt in season 1? He was essentially that way to Charles when they were first introduced. And then he became too whiny for a majority of his time with Charles, trying to keep his job and whatever. But I really think that he had some great moments because of the fact that, as somebody who was never in the closet or part of the LGBT community, I did enjoy watching the progression of Landon, because he's the kind of person that somebody who comes out of the closet like Jeffrey would want in their corner to help guide them on their way. Someone who's been outcast by their family and things like that. Landon was that light to keep Jeffrey on the path of and I'm not trying to make a pun here, straight and narrow, where it's like, don't get into a relationship with a woman to please your family, but then you're still gay, because you're going to do all kinds of things like, anything you can have sex with a man in the subway, motel, then you can bring back a disease to that woman, and then that's not fair to her. So at the beginning, I was like, I honestly don't care if Landon and Jeffrey get into a relationship. I think if nothing else, Jeffrey needs a friend more than anything else. But then Landon got way too thirsty, and then the whole thing with Charles was stupid. But after Charles knocked him to the floor, and he pretty much had the one-on-one talk about how, Landon, you're too good at what you do to let you go, but you have to understand I'm not gay, and more importantly, you can never do what you attempted to do in that room. Basically try to go down on him. And I love the fact that it really showed the unity in regards to how a person's orientation, gender, what have you, shouldn't impact how they're treated in the workplace unless they're completely out of line like Landon was. So basically from there, I think Landon stepped up as a character because he worked hard to get Candace and Charles back together, because Candace did something to Charles which brought out the best in him. And I think what even impacted him as a character for me as a viewer even more was the fact that he was putting his own feelings aside in order to do something for someone else. And I really love that about him. So Landon, and not to mention his dynamic with Maggie was great too. So Landon makes my favorite character list. Oscar, just like Mitch, nothing but great things to say. Loved his dynamic with Candace. He literally was like the first character to truly fool her, and not even out of a place of arrogance. You know, Jim technically was the one who was really the first one to fool her, leading to her being abducted by the Malones. But I think what Oscar did was even more impressive. He went after her heart and then eventually went after her bank account. And I think that's the key to making Oscar one of the most legendary characters in the series. And unfortunately, he overstayed his welcome. As soon as he was working for Jim to get Wyatt's inheritance back, he became kind of a punk. And not even in like a, man, that dude's a punk, like he'd whoop your ass. Basically a punk. He was Jim's stooge. You know, the fact that Jim was able to, you know, threaten him, beat him around and everything. I didn't like that. Not to mention the fact that just like Maggie and Warlock, these were calm, cool, collected, calculating characters who allowed their feelings to get the better of them, and as a result led to their untimely murders. So with Oscar, I love the fact that this showed us an even more calculating side than Jim. Basically someone who knew how to beat Candace at her own game. So Oscar, to me, definitely one of the best characters in the show. He was kind of like the man behind the chair, man in the chair for David. Like, you know, if David made a phone call to get intel on somebody or get something done, he was the guy to call. Great character. Number 9, Derek. I mean, when I really think about it, kind of like Oscar and Mitch, I think Derek is definitely one of those characters where I don't think I have anything negative to say about him. Sure, you know, obviously the origin story between him and Hannah and then how Candace was born was awful, but at the same time, I think he was a character on the list I wanted to see more from. I mean, he was just written off. He got arrested and that was it. And I'm like, what the hell? That's it? I honestly feel like Derek, you know, the fact that he came into the show and as time went on, it was revealed that he has a closer bond to two of the main characters that no one else does. It's like, oh my God, he was the guy that raped Hannah, but then he's her current love interest. And not only that, he's Candace's father. What? And then, of course, we learned his checkered past, knowing Veronica because she got him out of jail. He has a list of connections. There was so much intrigue to the character that I was honestly rooting for him. And as we all know, I did that almost year-long string of videos about the lion tattoo, and I was right. So Derek, definitely one of the best characters in the franchise as far as I'm concerned. Finally, number 10. I literally spent 15 minutes trying to figure out who to put on the list, but I put Catherine Cryer, and I know it's like, well, Jeremy, you say that kind of weird. Catherine Cryer, why not? I mean, shouldn't you be more confident about it? From her number 9 speech to, even though I still don't think she should have done it, that badass moment of killing Jennifer Salison and then pointing the gun towards Veronica, being there for Hannah through thick and thin and vice versa. I think for me, she became unbearable as soon as she turned into just a drunk who wanted to have sex. And then that led to her going to jail. And after that, I'm kind of like, she deserves to be there. So Catherine Cryer to me was a badass. I definitely feel like she had a knack for stealing the show. You know, especially during those earlier seasons where when a character like Jennifer Salison, Jim, Candace, and a number of other people, even Veronica, thought that they had the upper hand on Catherine, she would just give a look, she would deliver a line of dialogue, and she would just murder them in that particular scene. The acting on point. Even though I was not a fan of when she was all up in the threesomes and whatnot, Renee Lawless did a killer job with the role. I just didn't like that regression of the character. Not to mention going through all those links to keep a son alive who wants you dead. But either way, those are my 10 favorite characters, and I'll list them again. Amanda, Melissa, David, Maggie Day, Warlock, Mitch, Landon, Oscar, Derek, Catherine. Let me know your top 10 in the comment section below. I already got a feeling a lot of people are not going to like that Veronica didn't make the list, but again, this is just my personal opinion. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll talk to you all in the next video.